So we've got a wicked panel for you now. And we're going to get them to do some kind of introductions, because we've got Sara Matthews, who's the founder of Odyssey, the former HR director at Chelsea Football Club, the non-exec director at Netball Scotland. She's also the sister of Jane Ferrabato, our incredible marketing director. We've got Nicole Allison, who's the former general manager of Tottenham Hotspur Ladies and owner of Worcester City Women's Football Club. We've got Steph Harries, who's the managing director of Women's Sports Group. And we've got the awesome Rishi Jain, who is the director of Impact at Liverpool Football Club. So some really, really incredible panelists, where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. But Sara, over to you to introduce yourself, talk about your background quickly, and also if you do have anything to add, why includability could actually potentially make an impact in the sports world.
Okay, yeah, so well, you introduced me very well, so that was my background, but basically I've been in human resources for the last 25 years, focusing on people management, and then more recently I've specialised in EDI and HR in sport and entertainment and education. As Paul said, I work alongside Nicole at Worcester City Women's Football Club, and we're trying to create a female-led organisation which is basically changing the way in which football clubs operate, and being very focused on the values and the culture of the club, as well as the, obviously performance optimization on the pitch. Nick will talk a bit more, but we're in tier 5 of the women's pyramid of football. So we've got a way to go yet, but we've got lots of exciting ambitions for the club. So I've come from an HR background. I've been involved in includability for quite some time now. In my former role as HR director for Chelsea Football Club, I worked with Paul, Dave and the team to become a committed employer, and now I support the verification process for D&I through my business, Odyssey, which, as I said, is focused on diversity and inclusion in sport, education and entertainment. It's me.
Nice. And she's an absolute powerhouse. So if you do need any hints, tips, advice, Sara is definitely your person to go to. Nicole.
Hello there. Thank you. So I'm Nicole. I am the owner and CEO and probably everything in between of Worcester City Women's Football Club. Prior to that, football's been probably the biggest part of my life from a kind of 1-2-year-old, playing football, coaching football. For me, playing football professionally wasn't an option. It just simply wasn't a career that was possible in this country when I was growing up, and particularly from the area that I was brought up in, which is Worcester. There was nothing really going on for women and girls football at that time. I was extremely focused and determined, though, to have a career in football, and I didn't know what that looked like. There were no women and role models that I could look at to say, hey, I could have a career in marketing or business, finance focus, whatever it may be in football. But I just got myself involved in anything possible. I did a master's degree in football business that I completed about 10 years ago, and since then have worked in the industry, both men's and women's football, across brands, rights holders, research agencies, and then, as you mentioned, club as well. So in 2017, I took over as general manager of the Tottenham Hotspur ladies team, as they were at the time. We then transitioned and turned them the name into Tottenham Hotspur Women. And during that time as well that I was there, we went from an amateur football club through into semi-professional and then into professional as they got promoted into the Women's Super League. From that point, I actually then created my own agency and consultancy because I wanted to support players. So everything that Rob was talking about very much hits home with me in terms of how I obviously had to manage a squad of players at Tottenham and could recognise how little support there was for those transitions that those players were going through, how little money there was absolutely at that time as well, and that these players needed support. So a huge passion of mine was supporting them from an agent perspective, helping them with contracts, but also helping them with their off-pitch careers, which I still do a lot of now. Also consultancy, so across the world really in sort of supporting fan experiences, match day attendance growth, even the setup of leagues, all dedicated to women's football. and then had an amazing opportunity to own my own club, which wasn't part of the plan, but these best things never are. Moved back to Worcester about just over 2 years ago and set up Worcester City Women Football Club Limited in March 2021. As Sarah mentioned, we are a tier 5 club. We have a development team at tier 6, and we've just created an under 18s as well. So we're growing steadily, because everything about what we do is about being sustainable, financially sustainable. We're a standalone club. Everything we do is about ensuring we leave legacies for way beyond my time as well. And I met Sarah probably about 12, 13 months ago, Sarah, through Includability. So that just shows the power of this network. And we just aligned instantly, probably within about 5 minutes, obviously with our backgrounds of working at football clubs, but how we felt women's football can be different, and that actually by owning our own football club, doing things differently, and ensuring that from the very beginning, even though we're right at the bottom of the pyramid, we can be a perfect blueprint and case study for how things should be done, and how you can learn as you develop through to the top of the pyramid as well. So we're only 2 and a bit years into that journey, learning lots, but we're really well set up to then be able to grow and obviously become employers, become the biggest club in Worcester, and hopefully even beyond that as well.
And it is incredible, Nicole, what you've achieved, and the vision and the drive. It is incredible, and a testament to yourself, but also I think it is a blueprint. I think it is, and it can really help educate others to take that same path. And that sustainable growth is obviously massively important. Over to Steph.
Worked out my microphone. That's the first test. Sorry, I was listening intently. Hi, I'm Steph Harries. I am the Managing Director of Women's Sports Group, as introed. My background actually is sports production. So I was at Sky Sports and senior roles under Zone, and I was then controller of production for BBC Sport until August 2021. I've worked across the sport space, men's sport, para sport, women's sport. My ambition is that sport is sport. I would love to live in a world where it's just sport, and it's not defined by anything more than it just being sport. But as a result, my real passion, I suppose, and the things I was most proud of, and there were many, but probably in my most recent role before this one, was acquiring the Women's Euros, where I had to go to the BBC board and say, the reason we need to pay this massive sum of money is because this is going to be huge. And they all looked at me like I had 2 heads and went, you've got to be joking, this is a huge sum. Anyway, as it turns out, after those 6 minutes of very nervous tension in the Spain game, obviously England went on to win it. And that was a huge moment. It's not just about football, of course, but as the sort of globally most recognised sport, it was a huge groundbreaking moment for women's sports. So thank God, really, because otherwise that could have been an unmitigated disaster in terms of viewing figures and spend of public money. I also was at the helm when we produced the Women's World Cup, FIFA World Cup in 2019, which is generally regarded as a watershed moment for women's football. Sarah, to your point, and various others, this is about the entire football pyramid, but of course exposure at the top end ignites interest in, you have to have the whole ecosystem working from grassroots up. So these moments are important because they are what's seen, and exposure is crucial, but it's also what's not seen, which is absolutely categorically as important, of course. But when you have 1 billion people around the world watching something, that's a moment of potential societal change. So that is why it's so incredibly significant. Also the World Cup, the Netball World Cup, where in Liverpool we saw 6 million people tune in to watch that. It goes to show that domestic competition, we've seen it with the Ashes, the Women's Ashes. I don't know if anyone saw the Ashes to Ashes campaign. So brilliant. The point remains that this is not about the men's Ashes, the women's Ashes, it's the Ashes. And when we see the women's team do as brilliantly as they have, when we see those record attendance numbers, viewing numbers, ticket purchase numbers, merch, you're suddenly seeing a big tidal wave of progress, which is fantastic. So I was very proud of a number of moments in my career, but the ones that really stuck out for me were the ones where we saw change happen. The Washington Post said that women's sport can do at least one thing men's can't, and that's get bigger. And that's probably absolutely true. And we now at Women's Sports Group, where I started in September 2021, was our entire remit is to try and aid the change and the expedite the tidal shift in women's sport, bottom up and top down. So we work with governing bodies and federations that both sell media rights. We also work with the United Nations, excuse me, on their sustainable development goals, empowering women and girls around the globe to have access to sport and the importance of that on physical and mental well-being. We work with football clubs. We work with netball. We work with World Rugby. We work across the sporting landscape to try and drive progress and parity in women's sport. But we don't just work in women's sport. We do also work across men's because, as I said at the beginning, my ultimate aim is that we look at, I'm an Arsenal fan actually, just to be completely honest, but I hope that we look at Arsenal or Tottenham or Worcester or as a football club. Not men's club, not women's club. You support the badge, you support the team, you support football. Or netball.
No.
Or Rangers, or whatever it might be.
Or any sport.
Or indeed any sport.
Exactly. And I absolutely love it. And this is why I'm so incredibly excited about this kind of the sport setting. Just hearing from 3 people so far with incredible drive and appetite to actually make a difference. Rishi.
Morning, Paul. Morning, everyone. I'll keep it short and sweet, I suppose. I'm Rishi, Director of Impact at Liverpool Football Club. What that actually means is that I head up ED&I and sustainability. So for LFC, that falls into our Red Way programme strategy. So that is our overarching approach to what we call sustainability. So people, obviously it's people, it's ED&I, it's policies, etc. The planet, that's quite straightforward. And then communities, which is obviously a really key part. And that's all done through LFC Foundation. Career-wise, been in football for 20 odd years now. Started as a volunteer at Liverpool, actually, at the age of 14, did that and other roles for about 9.5, 10 years. Went to kick it out, went with many football league clubs, went to Man United, then saw some sense and came back to Liverpool. So my entire career has revolved around football, ED&I, sustainability, using the power of sport and particularly football to, if it sounds very cheesy, but make the world a better place, and sort of leverage the voice and the platform that we have got, my employees have got, the sport has got to sort of challenge some of those maybe negative behaviours that we see on a global scale as well.
And Rishi, you're absolutely fine. We love a bit of cheese at Includability. So it's not.
I keep it common.
We more cheese, the better.
Okay.
Incredible stuff. And look, I've been working on kind of some questions. And what I would like to say is, while some of the questions I've got are directed at certain people, actually feel free, kind of Rishi, Steph, Nicole, Sarah, to kind of also jump in and make sure that we're having a really, really good discussion here. But Steph, starting with you, you mentioned about the Ashes to Ashes campaign. Obviously, there was another campaign with Les Bleus as well, which went viral. I'm sure most people have kind of seen it. If you haven't, Dave's going to put the link into there. But how important do you think these types of campaigns are in challenging perceptions around women's sport?
So I think it's essential to challenge perceptions because I read an academic paper last week released by Sport Business Management Review, if anyone fancies reading it. It is fascinating because the thing about the Les Bleus campaign is you can look at it in a number of ways. It's always subjective, right? Any creative is subjective. Someone will like it, someone will hate it. And that's the great thing, as a creative, you put something out there and it is there for both, lauding and ridicule. And it's hard because you sort of lay yourself bare. But I watched that campaign and I had to watch it 2 or 3 times because I was unclear of my own reaction to it. So there is an argument on it. If you have seen it or haven't seen it, essentially it's split screen and AI has been used to blur the gender of the number France number 10. You think you're watching Mbappe, and actually you're not watching Mbappe. So I won't ruin it for anyone that hasn't seen it, but essentially there is this assumption based on perception that you're watching this incredibly, extraordinarily skillful player, and actually, as it turns out, it's not Mbappe at all. So the fact that there is an argument that would say, and there's a very sort of compelling argument that says you've had to use men's football to highlight women's football to say you're one team. There is an argument that says ashes to ashes. I actually haven't read a single negative review of that campaign because I thought, it's so brilliant. But the play on words, but also the extraordinary play. It's different. The games are different. They don't have to be the same, but they are ultimately the same discipline. They are skillful. They are the athletes at the top of their game. So do you need to create these campaigns? I think you do. I think there are certain sports which lend themselves to needing to be turned on their head. Some of the biggest and most successful campaigns of all time, Nike's Dream Crazier, was a study of why there is a perception that when a female athlete loses it because the moment gets too much, and it is incredibly hard for any athlete. My 8-year-old Sunday, really hard, really had to keep it in when he let a goal in. It's a moment where you can lose it, but yet why is it that the perception is that when a female athlete loses it, she's crazy and mad and hormonal, and a male athlete loses it and here he goes again, oh dear. There's this kind of there's a different perception, and Nike's Dream Crazy I always hold up as a real way of turning perception on its head. So I think to your question, I think these campaigns are essential because I think they get the wide mainstream audience talking. It went viral. It was shared. I thought I was getting heckled. I didn't say anything controversial yet. No problem. So I think it's essential because the exposure point about sport is that it does have the power to change lives. I think that there is a moment where a cultural or socially significant conversation that is born of a campaign, I think, can only be a good thing. That campaign was shared more widely by males than it was by females. So that in itself is a really fascinating thing to go, bloody hell, crikey, I was really surprised when the gender was revealed. These are important questions to ask, right? It's about perception. Do we have to create these campaigns? Yes, I think we do. Do brands have a responsibility to do something a bit more interesting than just associating with something to get eyeballs on it? Yes, they do, because we're a really discerning audience these days and we want to be challenged. And I think it's essential.
I absolutely loved it. I thought both campaigns were absolutely incredible. Rishi, this is kind of not one that I find pre-prepared, but from a Liverpool Football Club perspective, what are some of the campaigns that you've kind of worked on?
So from an ED&I perspective, Paul, I suppose what's really important for us as a club is to own it, to solely sort of really full and take on our responsibilities around ED&I. Like, you've got these organisations who operate in football and have done for a long time, and they do incredible work. But I think as a club of our size, of our stature, you have to sort of go, right, we're Liverpool Football Club. What do we stand for? What do we believe in? How do we take ownership of that? So we've done that through Red Together. That's a sort of overarching ED&I brand. And that allows us to sort of leverage support for the likes of Stonewall Rainbow Laces, Level Playing Field, Weeks of Action campaign, which is around disability, mental health weeks, etc., but also maintain the identity of we are Liverpool Football Club. This is what we believe in. So, for example, last year we delivered a 4-part series campaign celebrating the diversity of our supporters. And that was really purposeful in the way that we did that, because, and I've spoken about this a number of times, so apologies if you've heard this before, but there is a growing narrative in football, which is very much around sort of like, to be a proper fan, you have to go to games, you have to dress a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you have to know all the songs, etc. It's quite exclusive if you think about it. So what we wanted to do as a team, we got together and said, how do we really sort of address that, but in a way where we go, actually, diversity on the pitch, we celebrate that all the time, but diversity off the pitch is what makes us, in my view, the biggest and the best football club in the world. So we did that. We told the story around the International Day of Disability. That was a story about the young lad called Joel. Joel had a sort of he's an inspirational young man. Had to overcome some real adversities, but we talked about his story and he met one of the players. We've done stuff around Black History Month, International Women's Day, LGBT plus History Month, and we've actually talked about and celebrated our supporters and said, actually, to their diversity off the pitch is what makes us Liverpool. That's what it's all about. And some of them were Scouts, some of them weren't, and that's exactly what you want. But yeah, and that from a campaign perspective, we feel that for us as a club, you have to really go, what's important to us, what's going to land, what's going to resonate, and then it's how you feed in those partners, like the show race, the red card, etc., the kick it out, the level playing fields, the stone walls, and use their messaging, their overarching, and obviously their expertise, particularly with like the Stonewall, etc., their expertise to grow the work that we're doing. And we're quite happy where we landed last year. The challenge is obviously how you grow, how you keep it fresh, how you continue to influence people. But what we've seen and what we do benefit from is the fact that we've got a group of players across men's and women's who are incredible advocates for specific strands of ED&I. So actually, we can leverage that and use their voices and actually do it in a really genuine and authentic way. It's not about these work from time to time, and I get it, but it's not about like super like cinematic treated, like really like dramatic pieces of content. Sometimes it's really easy and you just throw a camera on a player or a manager and go, what do you think about taking the knee? And then they give you all this incredible stuff, and I'm like, brilliant, because actually those real conversations, they go a long way. So that's a very long-winded way of me saying we do loads.
Love that. And also, I think, from my role as MD of Jack at Work and being involved in jack.org, the power of storytelling is absolutely massive. The most reaction that we see from people and the most change that happens is when people show vulnerability and talk about their own experiences, because it opens them up to feeling, actually, I can talk about how I feel. In fact, go on, Rishi. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, to add to that point, it's real. That's the thing. Like, it's real, it's genuine, it's authentic. And obviously there is always a time and a place for like something which is going to be really eye-catching and grab your attention. But what we've been able to do is sort of leverage the balance between that at this moment in time. Like I said, the challenge is how you keep that fresh, because there's only so many conversations you can have around, for example, disability inclusion, where you're saying, oh yeah, we should all be doing this, we should all be doing that. Sometimes you do need to freshen it up to grab people's attention, but we're constantly working on using the sort of brand power that we have and the fact that we are a local football club to try and change things for the better.
Can I just make a point on that? Can I just interject just quickly? I think Rishi's absolutely right, and it's important to say that there is a difference between the freedom that a brand has, perhaps, and football clubs, absolutely. The one badge, one club policy, of course, it's what do you stand for? I mean, I would say this as an Arsenal fan, and I'm sure Liverpool have done some amazing stuff also, but one of the most inclusive pieces of content I've seen recently was their announcement of Declan Rice. So that if you watch that, it was a collab with Adidas, and it's basically just the fans talking interspersed with some of the players, the female and male players at the club. And it's just a really inclusive piece of content. It's just a really nice togetherness. What a fan is, Rishi, is exactly, it's such an important point, isn't it? Togetherness, no one feeling like you have to be a certain way to be a Liverpool fan, to be an Arsenal fan, to be a Worcester fan, to be a Blues fan. Fans are fans. This is about a family and a togetherness. This is not about pointing people out. Anyway, I'll put it in the chat, but it's just a really nice, very simple piece of content about Declan Rice's announcement. And I just think it's simple, effective. You haven't thrown AI at it. It's not expensive, but it's effective.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a great piece of content, that stuff. I agree with you.
And Rishi, I'm just going to chuck something on you now, because being Liverpool, being a brand, having a team, there's employee resource groups that you can kind of call upon. You're kind of really working on the strategy of what you're doing. For clubs that perhaps don't have that, or for sports organisations that are smaller than that, or perhaps kind of amateur, what advice would you give to somebody that actually wants to start on that journey, that wants to create campaigns, that wants to kind of really start making that progress, but doesn't perhaps kind of have maybe the ERGs or the experts hand? What advice would you give?
I'm going to lean on Steph's point, to be honest, onto that one. Actually, say you've got your ERGs, you've got your resource in your fan base, and obviously I've listed off a whole host of sort of football stakeholders who operate in the space and have done for a number of years. And at the end of the day, to create a campaign, you need a phone. Let's be honest, you need a phone. And yes, it might not be the most professional thing, but actually if it's genuine, it's authentic, it'll cut through. And that's where obviously our setup isn't thankfully done with my phone. It's done with a much more professional team than me. But it works. And actually, if you can leverage like what's important to you, what's important to your football club, what's important to your supporters, your players, etc., for me, it doesn't really matter what it looks like, because it's the words that are the most important thing. It's that which will cut through. And you've seen that, actually. There's some great examples, and kind of last season before, it all sort of blurs into more money for as long as I have. But when Danny Ings went out with the young supporter with the headphones, that's it. Like, that was probably filmed on a phone or a really small camera. A little bit of context, but actually what's impactful is the image of that. It's held up as an incredible piece of work, and rightly so. And other clubs are looking at that thinking we need to be doing that, and that's how you influence people change.
But more people are doing it, right? More players have now come out walking through the tunnel wearing headphones.
Yeah, it leads to change, and actually sometimes it's the most simple things which don't cost the biggest amounts of money, but actually cut through and make a difference, or are a bit more original, that make the big impact. Like when I was working at Kick It Out and I was working with the 72 Football League clubs, you're going from organisations who are run by 5 volunteers and all the focus is on literally we just need to get to the next match day, to football clubs who, if what you're doing doesn't contribute to promotion, they're not interested. And you have to leverage, like, how can you do these campaigns, how can you use initiatives in these two huge sort of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what they're doing. But actually, what always shone through was what's important to this football club. What is important to the individuals that run it.
And that's what I think I'm really, really excited about, again, with the sports setting, is those football clubs that have 5 volunteers running it against those football clubs that have 2,000 staff, and actually them coming together and kind of sharing perspectives. There's still some incredible people at those organisations. They just don't have the budget, the resource, or sometimes the knowledge. And that's where I think that by us sharing this experience, Richie, you sharing your experience, Steph, Sarah, Nicole, that's where we can actually start to make that kind of meaningful progress. Nicole, I'm going to come to kind of you next, kind of from an owner of a football club, and the impact that you might have seen from the Lionesses' win in the Euros of last year. I mean, obviously, there's been a huge impact. There's been the impact and the knowledge now of the women's game, I think, is kind of expedited. But what in particular have you seen?
Yeah, I think it's certainly the awareness and the growth of the visibility, which, Steph's been saying how important that is. I think, when I think of me growing up and even only, 2-3 years ago, the Women's Super League wasn't on, BBC free to air or Sky Sports. It was, you had to go and find it and sign up for a free app. And to find any kind of news about women's football, you had to be a real hardcore fan and go searching for that. And I think we've certainly seen a shift leading up to the Euros, but then also since that it is a lot more available. I still think we could do a lot more. I'd love to see more magazine shows, filler content, those sorts of things where actually, we are telling those stories that we've been talking about, the authentic stories. But I mean, there's recently been an impact report done about the Euros, which shows that, it's not just the societal movement that there's been a huge impact on. It's also been some genuine increase of participation between women and girls, also economic activity. I think it was £81 million economic boost to those host cities, which is fantastic. And it goes to then show and possibly even change those perceptions on, women's football is a really powerful product. It's not just a charity. It's something that actually brands, cities, the whole ecosystem. It's incredibly valuable. And I suppose for us Worcester City women, I mean, Worcester isn't a area that's well known for football. It's predominantly rugby and cricket. We don't really have, any sort of, there wasn't even any Euros games that were played anywhere really near us. But the awareness, the role models, the interest from local companies to actually want to associate themselves now with women's football, and particularly us, because we're very clear on our vision and our values, is really been quite powerful. So we're certainly riding off the back of that, and then also doing the same whilst obviously the World Cup's on now.
What legacy do you think the World Cup could leave?
Well, I think, obviously for England, it's a case of if we're gonna win or we're gonna do particularly well, we can grow on the success we had from last summer as well. But I think worldwide for women's football as a whole, the fact that this World Cup, there's more teams than ever in there. I mean, we just saw Philippines beat New Zealand yesterday, which was just amazing to see that. there's so many legacies that can be created from this World Cup. We've also, I think this is the first World Cup that FIFA have actually, and through working with FIFPro, the governing body for professional players, have ensured that there has been equality on the level of sort of the environment and the resource that is provided to the competing nations within the World Cup. They've also then, FIFA committed to, by 2026 World Cup, equality in prize money and pay, which is huge. And I think, you know, Steph mentioned 2019 was a watershed moment for women's football, and that World Cup having 1 billion people watching kind of felt like FIFA woke up at that point to sort of see the potential of women's football and this industry. And we're now seeing that, even looking ahead from this World Cup, how can we make the next stage? So it's got everybody talking, but you know, always with a caveat of there's still an awful lot to do, particularly towards the bottom end of the pyramid, which of course, you know, I'm now heavily involved in, having sort of been more at the elite side with Tottenham. There's so much that needs to be done in order to improve those foundations and see these clubs move through sustainably.
I think one of the other caveats is, one of the disappointing things is Nike not selling Mary Earps's goalkeeper's kit. You know, and the level of kickback that's also received, and kind of rightly so. You know, and sometimes it takes a decision like that to again make sure that change kind of occurs, albeit in the wrong way, but absolutely, you know, it needs to happen.
I think players feel a lot more empowered now than they, you know, used to actually be able to call those things out, and they take that role very seriously. You know, even if you look at just before the World Cup started, the Lionesses wrote a letter to the FA as they're having a discussion at the moment about their bonus payments. You know, they actually made it clear there that they see their role as being just beyond a player. This is about putting things right for the future and the next generation. So we are starting to see that more, and players are allowed and encouraged to be their authentic selves to push those messages.
Yeah, definitely. Rishi, I'm going to come back to you for a second. Could you tell us about, because we saw a story about kind of the sustainability element of kind of Liverpool Football Club. Could you tell us about Liverpool FC's approach to sustainability and why the club concentrates so much effort in this area?
Yeah, of course. So, for clarity, when we say sustainability, we mean the 3 pillars. We mean people, planet, communities, but I'll talk to environmental, I'm guessing what you're looking for there, Paul. End of the day, it's quite simple. It's because we feel we've got a responsibility in that space. That sounds very simple, but it really is. As a club, we know that we can influence people's behaviours. We know that as a football club, we're obviously responsible and have a lot of foot traffic, like on a match day. It's obvious. Like, we're very open with our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in terms of the way we report that. But actually, for us, it's about how can we adapt and influence our own behaviours around environmental sustainability, and then how can we say, well, we're doing this, why don't you come and join us? And actually that's what we've been able to do, is particularly with some of our commercial partners. So we've done some incredible work with SC Johnson on the work that they've done supporting our foundation. We've done stuff with Quorn as well, in terms of obviously their story tells itself. But for us, it's like, we're Liverpool Football Club. Sustainability is a massive topic, rightly so. If we can talk to it with a level of authenticity, then we will do so. So we're the only club to hold the ISO 2012-1, which is like a management standard around sustainability. That's something we're really proud of, and that's great. And other clubs will catch us up, and that it's not actually about that, but actually it shows that it's genuine. So when we are talking about environmental sustainability and trying to change our behaviours and people's behaviours, there's actually some substance to what we're doing. But in a nutshell, Paul, like, because it's the right thing to do. To try and be more sustainable, to try and make better decisions, and the ones that we can influence. And we can't change everything. We can't change absolutely everything. Like, the football structure is the football structure. There are planes to be jumped on. There are travels to do. There are pre-season tours to do. But any sensible changes that we can make in terms of the way we do things, plus any offset, and which comes with that, that's obviously going to make a difference to the planet.
Is there much, this might be a naive question, is there much collaboration that goes on between clubs to make progression when it comes to sustainability?
I'd say it's started. So, like, for example, the Premier League have got a head of sustainability now. There's a bit of a working group across Premier League clubs as well, where people are starting to share best practice. At the end of the day, it's not there is elements of competition in that space, because obviously everyone wants to lead. You want to be number one in the Premier League table. You want to be number one in everything else. Like that's sport. That's the beauty of sport, really. But also there's an absolute willing from all clubs who are really involved in this space to share, because we're all doing it in different ways. And if we can go, oh, actually, we're working with this supply and they're really good in this space, it doesn't really change what we do. But if we can help another club make a difference and influence their fans and the way they do things, then people are really open around that. And it's very much the same with ED&I. I think that the walls have come down a little bit in recent years, and people are a lot more open to the sharing best practice. And Sarah knows that, obviously, through the work that we've done together. Like, people are much more open to like sharing best practice and sharing knowledge, and go, oh, we've got this policy. Like, yeah, just send it over. What's hard is that when it becomes out of industry, because then football is, and sport is, as we all know in this call, it is a bit of a different beast. Has lessons to learn from outside of industry, but also does incredible stuff in terms of leveraging the brand power and the feeling and the buzz that you get of being with sport and trying to influence change, whether it's across ED&I or sustainability.
Also, I think with that brand, and also that's music's my ears, right? Is what we want that collaboration to happen as much as possible. We're not asking you to loan Mo Salah to somebody and then it's kind of this huge competition. It is about sharing the best practice to make meaningful progress, but also it inspires the future generations, and then this whole change can kind of occur. Sarah, actually, whilst kind of Rishi then kind of mentioned to you about kind of the work that you've been doing together, how far do you think ED&I has progressed in sports organisations and governing bodies?
I think there has been a lot of progress, but there is an awful lot more work to do. I think that governing bodies are certainly starting to put in place things like standards and levels of commitment from the organisations that they work in. So you've got things like governance codes, which include EDI. The Premier League, as Rishi well knows, has the PLEDIS, which is the EDI standard, which all clubs in the Premier League have to go through. And there's different levels, because obviously clubs are at very different stages, even within the Premier League. Rishi is at the very top of, achievements in football at Liverpool and the work that he's done over the years. But then you'll have a new club like Luton Town coming in, or a Nottingham Forest, where they haven't been on the same journey, both from a football perspective and probably from an EDI perspective. So you've got, there's a huge breadth of stuff, and Rishi's absolutely right. People are definitely collaborating a lot more. We work together quite a lot, as particularly as those bigger iconic brands in football have got a lot of power with the messages that they can put out. And Rishi talked about the campaigns that Liverpool have done, Arsenal, Chelsea, etc. And all of those have been very powerful. So I think that raises the profile. It starts to challenge discrimination, poor behaviour, inequity. It starts to present questions around perhaps facilities for maybe women's teams versus men's teams, etc., etc. So it begs lots of questions. I think the challenge, and I work across lots of different sports now, which is absolutely fantastic, and I think there's a commonality, which is that whilst we're really getting great at messaging campaigns, how we narrate what we want to be and how we want to present ourselves in the world of sport, the fundamentals underneath that, so say your corporate policies and procedures, does your marketing department really think about the terminology they're using, avoiding own goals, moving away from reputational, legal and risk issues into genuinely having an organisation that is inclusive? And I think that's a really difficult journey. It's a long journey. And you need to get every person in your organisation to be thinking about inclusion in the smartest way and embedding it through everything you do. So, for example, if you're the the legal person in a sports organisation? Are you working with third parties and telling them, right, this is the EDI language that we want you to be adhering to, this is the policy we want you to adhere to, this is the way we want to manage diversity and inclusion in our organisation, and we expect our third parties and our suppliers to do that. Now, there are organisations, and there certainly are in football, organisations that are already doing that, but there's lots and lots of sports organisations, and as we've pointed out, some of them are very, very small, and maybe with volunteers and don't know what they don't know, or they do know but they're not quite at that space yet. And then there's some very large organisations in sport that should be doing better, because we see them in the news quite often and they're not doing better, they're not doing the right things, they're not managing things in the right way. So I think it's very, very broad.
And I think that's just, I think is the broad spectrum. Also, it's about making it visible. And when you kind of mentioned about kind of communicating, actually making your ED&I objectives, making your sustainability objectives visible, and the plans say, well, this is exactly where we're at, rightly or wrongly, this is exactly where we're at, and this is where we would love to get to, and this is how we're going to get there. Because actually that really matters, even from a recruitment perspective, it matters because people care. From a fan's perspective, a stakeholder's perspective, visibility actually then just provides a degree of clarity.
It absolutely does, and you're absolutely right. I think I saw when I was still in HR, and I did quite a lot of recruitment, more and more so when you're meeting candidates, one of the questions that they will have will be about diversity and inclusion, sustainability, your corporate social responsibility. There's some very educated questions that now come into interviews. I think fans, I'm sure somebody who loves Liverpool will love Liverpool and the badge, whatever, but in real terms, fans are now asking a lot more questions, and Rishi will get this from his resource groups and from his fans forums, etc. There's a lot more demand to see what organisations are doing, and I think the bigger the brand, the more demand there is for that. And sports brands are even at the smaller end. At Worcester City, we have a commitment to our community. We have a commitment to do things in the right way and support and promote women's sport, girls' sport, disability sport, and that doesn't matter that we're Worcester City. That's the same at Liverpool. So I think if wherever you are in the ecosystem of sport, you've got a real responsibility to drive these messages forward and create that visibility and have the debate and the discussion as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes it is about being comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes, because that's a really good starting point to actually start making the change that we probably need. I'm just going to, Steph, one of the things that kind of we've been kind of talking about in the past is, do you feel the positive impact of increased exposure has had an influence on representation behind the camera?
Yes. Can you see me? My screen just went blank.
We can see you.
Oh, God. Right. I don't know what's happened. Sorry. Something's gone wrong here on this computer. Yeah, I do. I do think that. I think that with increased exposure comes greater. You need the exposure. You need the sort of to mainstream anything and to get the conversation going. As I was saying, sort of top down and bottom up. You need the exposure. So I think one of the ladies that spoke earlier was saying that you couldn't watch Super League, Women's Super League, until relatively recently. You had to try and find it. It was on BT Sport, but and actually one of the reasons that I put so many cameras on the BBC, I bought the Women's Super League with Barbara Slater, the Director of Sport, and we put a lot of money behind the production because we wanted that parity of coverage. It was really important that we had that parity of coverage. And it's very expensive, but it's right. You invest in things that you believe in, and that parity was incredibly important, and it's paid dividends because, of course, it's now on a prime time on BBC One network and everyone and Sky Sports, and there's a great take up of it. Visibility exposure is really, really important. It's just that there are so many components that are important. I mean, women's sports undeniably enjoyed a massive breakthrough moment this year in attendances and audiences and commercial interest, and there's record viewing figures. But the challenge is building on that to create the movement that propels this sector into the mainstream, and that's the visibility is super important. Mainstream women's sport, as Emma Hayes has always said, as a brilliant manager, all I ever wanted was for women's football to be mainstream, and any individual in any sporting discipline will say the same. We just want the visibility. The entire ecosystem from grassroots up needs to sing, and so exposure is essential for long-term sustainable growth. But ultimately, if you look at revenue, investment, coverage, men's sport's doing better, and it's people like us that have to be the driving force behind ensuring that the existence of stereotypes get shelved. I've completely forgotten the question. Was it about exposure?
It was about the exposure, and then and the increased exposure and the influence on representation behind the company.
Representation behind the company. So of course, the most visible thing is obviously the television, radio, pod exposure, of course. So when we talk about camera, also it's about the overall media exposure, I think, which is incredibly important, but it does have to be reflected. I have a real problem with any business focusing their all of their energies on the optics of what you can see. Too often I believe that diversity and inclusion is based on optics, and actually that isn't what inclusion is. Inclusion is about creating an inclusive culture where people feel like they belong, and it's a great deal more than that. So yes, front of camera and exposure is or on air is very important, but of course it's also about the representation that you have off screen or off the air. And we know, the irony of all of this, of course, is that we know that with greater diversity of thought, you come to better conclusions, which means that you make better business decisions. But we aren't there yet. You've just got to look at the management of football clubs, because we've been talking about football. There aren't enough female CEOs. I know the FTSE Business Review has done a great job of trying to encourage in the biggest businesses, certainly in the UK, to ask for a minimum of 33% representation. But it's also not just about gender, it's about people of all backgrounds feeling able to aspire to go. So in short, my answer would be that sort of visibly it's very, very important to be able to see it to be it, as Billie Jean King said, but it's also very important to be creating inclusive cultures in the workplace where an individual, the next generation, see someone they can identify with, to be able to think they can do it, and creating those positive role models and challenging gender stereotypes. More women occupying more space on sports pages and newspapers as pundits alongside male counterparts in any sport, on TV and radio. Representation at every level is the key to driving wholesale change across sport. So we all as business leaders have a massive responsibility to be driving that, and certainly in my role, putting pressure on businesses I work with to understand that responsibility. To Rishi's point, sustainability isn't just about environmental sustainability. Of course, it's about the sustainability of a business in terms of inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to kind of wrap this up, because I would like to just open it up for 7 or so minutes just to the floor, to kind of our panelists. But this is, I guess, just to Sarah and Nicole, because I think what you're doing at Worcester City Women's Football Club can be replicated, when it's done well, can be really replicated across so many clubs, both amateur and professional, because you do it so incredibly well. What's your short to kind of mid-term objectives? You mentioned kind of you're in tier 5 now. You've got some incredible foundations in place. You're going to be an incredibly sustainable club and no doubt successful. But what's your short to kind of mid-term objectives? Open to both of you, of course.
Well, I'll start, Sarah. In terms of short, looking literally ahead sort of 12 to 18 months, we need to get our first team that is currently at tier 5 into tier 4. The reason why that makes a big difference is because there has started to be more funding from Premier League, and also the Football Association trickle down into tiers 3 and 4, which are grouped together as a national league in the women's football pyramid. So by getting that promotion to tier 4, we start to get a bit more funding and support, whereas at the moment we don't get a single penny, so we have to fund all of that ourselves. So that's a really, naturally very important short-term goal. Our vision is to be one of the leading women's football clubs in the UK, and when we say about leading, it's about everything we've just talked about, leading on sustainability, DI, and also performance on the pitch. So we're very, I suppose, quite focused at the moment on building our people, which is why vision, values and culture has been such a big focus for the last 2 years, because that is how we've brought people into the club, and they believe in our journey. They want to be part of that. They want to play their part in that, and everybody is volunteers. So we have to ensure that we maintain that as well, and maintain it in a very I suppose gradual and sustainable way, and I'm very conscious of that. And I always say to everybody that is at the club, if we've got 100 steps to get to where we want to be, we can't jump any step, we can't miss any step. We have to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and keep going, because if we miss a step, we quite quickly will almost lose ourselves and our vision and values as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Sarah, what do you want to add to that?
So we both have the same vision, which is that we will be in the WSL, and like Steph, I know Emma Hayes very well, and I've had the benefit of her wisdom both at Chelsea and since I've left, and it's really exciting to have worked with someone like Emma, but also to have seen the work that she did in the time that I was at Chelsea. A lot of these big football clubs started as part of the foundation or the charitable side of the football clubs. And that's quite a change of journey when you move into the real professional end of things. This is a real challenge for us. Nick and I, we are touting for sponsors. We're crowdfunding. We're doing everything because the pyramid does not support us to develop and grow as a tier 5 team. We have to support and sustain that ourselves. So every single thing we do is absolutely critical. And from the work that we've done, we've got players from further up the league coming and saying we would like to come and play for Worcester City Women because we've heard it's a great club, it's really inclusive. It's all about the values. It's all about being part of our Worcester City Women family. We've got other football clubs, men's football clubs, coming and talking to us about how we've been doing things. And Nick's done amazing work getting us a stadium, which is far bigger than many football clubs have. So we've worked really, really hard, but we're really focused on, we want to be at the top of the WSL, but we want to do it in absolutely the right way, because I think we can all sit and see how sports organisations have had to unpick things because they've not done it in the right way. They've missed some of those steps out, and then they've made themselves into a bit of a mess. So we just want to do it really, really smartly. And obviously, if anybody would like to crowdfund us, then please feel free. We'll happily send you the link. Every pound will help. But it's we're on such an exciting journey, and Nick and I have become such great friends as a result of this, and that's also a massive thank you to actually Includability, because that's what brought us together. They went football, put them in the same room, something will happen. And it has, but also in other sports, like the work in Netball Scotland and stuff, all of those different sports, the women's side of those games or the funding for those sports is a real challenge, and that has to change. We have to put the investment into women's and particularly girls' development, because girls are not staying in sport in school, they're not carrying on their sporting activities, and we're losing them, and that's our talent pathway, whichever sport it is. But so there's some really important things that have to happen over the next, I would say, 5 years for us to really build on the fantastic work that the Lionesses have done. I mean, that's a showcase now, and everyone needs to leverage off it to get whatever they can for sport, for women and girls, but also for para sport, etc. There's a lot of extra work that the UK needs to do, and our governing bodies need to do to support all the different types of sport in many formats.
Yeah. And
sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, not at all. It's been so, I think, so insightful, and it just again fills me with huge pride that we've got this amount of people in a room. And this is only just the very beginning of what we wanted to achieve. And I would just like to say, I'm not surprised that you're having players, dropping down from tiers above to come and play for your football club, because it is, I think done probably both Includability and our recruitment company is B Corp certified. When you do things in the right way, not only does it feel good and it's the right thing to do, but actually you do get noticed, and you can still be successful, but you're just doing it in the right ways. And I think that is certainly a way for people to seek and start to take that same methodology and process and engage with the community. I think Liverpool have a community, Arsenal have a community, Fairford have a community. There is so much that make up a football club, a sports club, a netball club beyond the 10 players, 11 players, 15 players, whatever it is. And we need to make sure everyone's included in that. We're not going to have a chance to ask any of the questions. We will ask the questions to the panelists, and then we'll send it out in the newsletter to you. All I would ask is, we're building out this community. So any connections that you have that you think would add value to our community, whether that's a consultancy provider, whether it's something that would be beneficial because it's benefited you to somebody else, please just let us know. Please drop me, Dave, James, Chris a message, and we will make sure that we act upon it, and then we'll get those conversations sorted. We want this to be the biggest, most thriving sports community that does make an impact. And that does include sometimes challenging each other, but a bit of positive challenge is not going to be a bad thing, right? So if anyone wants any more information, please just kind of let myself, Dave, or James know. Also, if you've got any success stories, we've heard loads just in the space of an hour. We have a comms team, and we don't want to be keeping these stories internally, because again, the power of storytelling and sharing actually could inspire and empower somebody else. So if you have any success stories, please let us know. We will get in touch with you. We'll write it up, go on the blogs, go across socials. But importantly, it might just make a difference to somebody else. So we've got 2 events happening, actually. So one is a Jack event tomorrow. We launched Jack at Work at the beginning of this month. It was an incredible in-person event. We've got the Jack at Work launch event part 2 happening tomorrow. So there will be a link to that as well. Hopefully it's in the feed. So please do sign up. At the moment, I think we've got 200 coming. We've got incredible neurodiversity, ED&I, and future of wellbeing panels on it. And then the August ESG, which is on the 30th of August, we've got Sean Flores, who's a TEDx speaker, talks about his journey with OCD, and talks about that both from a personal perspective, but also working with the workplaces. Victoria Hardy, who founded a company called Ginged Unhinged, and also just released a book called, I Can See Amy Clapping, called My Menopause, My Journal, My Rules. So she'll be talking all around kind of menopause and menopause in the workplace. And then Fiona Locke, I believe, is on this call. Fiona gives a wave, who's the founder of the Creative Wellbeing Company, and is incredible. So sign up, share it with your colleagues, share it with your networks, and yeah, let's make this absolutely incredible. And we'll be catching up with you individually over the coming week or so anyway. But look, have an amazing rest of the day, an amazing rest of the week. Thank you to all the panelists, and let's go and do some incredible stuff.